Okay, so this morning what we're getting ready to do is make the pieces up that will make the grate. And it's really a fairly simple process, but a fair bit of precision is required, and or care, however you like to look at it. That brown key in the miter fence has to be exactly the right dimension as your slot, and the spacing between that open slot from the dado and that key is critical. If that's messed up, then this whole process doesn't work. So what we'll do is make a series of dado cuts through our Paduk here, and then after we have done that, I'll rip the Paduk to the widths that I need, and then by flipping them back and forth we'll have a grate. The intention is I'm going to make the grate first, and then over in the sole itself I'll cut the opening in that center section of the sole to match whatever size that I come up with for the grate itself. It's easier to make the grate first and then cut the dimensions that we need for the in the sole itself. So let me get to work and I'll cut a bunch of slots and I'll show you what that looks like. Well, there's a little bit of bow in the piece of Paduk that I selected. I should have paid more attention to that. But the notion is, as you can see, that we're cutting these grooves, or dados, and they're well spaced. What's that? 6, 6. So we're getting a really consistent spacing. So then what we'll do ultimately after we groove this whole thing is we'll rip these strips, and then we can cut those strips to the length that we want, and then we'll have what we need, the building blocks for this grate. I'm a little at a loss right now to think what I want to do about this bowing situation. This stuff is so stiff that I don't know if I can push it down hard enough to make that bow go away, but I may try that. If you don't get the depth right, then the grate will have, when you first made it together, they'll either be too tall and there'll be a little mismatch, or if you go too deep, then they'll go past each other, and that looks funky. You need it to come out just right, so some care and feeding in this process is critical. Now you can certainly accommodate everything at the end by sanding or milling the entire assembly, which I may end up doing. But we'll sort that out when we get there. Okay, so now we've put all the dados in our blank, and I did find that I was able to press down hard enough on the blank to get it to go flat, and so all the groove depths or dado depths are nice and consistent. So now the next trick is working the rip out to get my strips to be exactly the right size, and that will take some fooling around. One thing I should mention on these kinds of projects is, you know, any of us that do this video work, you know, nobody wants to watch every last little bit of this, but the time it takes to do some of these things is clearly a lot longer than the few seconds or minutes that anybody watches these videos. So that step alone probably took me I don't know, nearly 10 minutes to work through. So the next step to getting the rip width perfect is likely to take at least that. So one thing that I've worked with all kinds of saws and tools over the years, and while it is certainly easier to get the precision you want with the nice tools that I get to work with these days, I got this kind of work done with way less amazing table saws in the past. One of the critical things to make this work is have a miter gauge that is tight in its slot, because if the blank is working around, you get less than straight dado cuts, and that isn't just straight, it's also changes the dimensions. So it's important that your gauge be fit tight to the slot so you don't get that kind of slop, and that doesn't require an Incra gauge type tool to get it done, but it does mean that you need a miter gauge that fits good. One thing I wanted to point out while I do this is that currently my saw is unplugged. My intent here is not to be a woodworking show. There's lots of other good places to learn these techniques besides here. But as I do this, I certainly know why anyone would make the comments about know your tools, use the proper safety equipment, and know where your hands are and know where the blades are. These are dangerous tools, and lack of care could get you a result that you just didn't have in mind, and I certainly don't want to be responsible for somebody doing something stupid with one of these power tools. Don't take them for granted. So what we're doing now is installing rip blades. I'm using a glue line rip blade that gives me a nice smooth cut right now. I'll get my reeving knife back in. And this is probably one of the best safety tools around, is having one of these devices on your saw. And I know not everyone has this kind of equipment, but if you don't, then this little bit is the reason to spend the money for a better tool, because this knife is hugely responsible for eliminating kickback, particularly with working with some of these more exotic hardwoods. Even this one that's showing that bowing, it's even more bowed now after cutting all those dados, because what has happened is you've changed the internal tension of the wood. So the wood, as you cut it, wants to either close back up on itself, or in some cases maybe even flare out. And without that reeving knife keeping the wood away from the back edge of this saw blade, that's when you start getting kickbacks. The wood will catch that backside and it wants to come back up in your face, and bad things start happening. I also use somewhere, and I need to finish tightening this down. And using zero clearance inserts is hugely helpful to eliminating tear out up here at the leading edge. Also, to do these grooves requires a stack type dado. I don't think that you can get the kind of flat bottom you need with the wobble type dados. So I think you can't. It just seems like it would be hard to get the kind of interface that you need to make this work right. Okay, so we've lowered our blade, and in this case, for this setup, or this grate, I'm looking for a 0.757 rip width. So what I will do is, I'm not going to cut an entire strip. I'm going to start my cut, and then I'll use my calipers to check to see if that's if I'm getting the right strip width. If not, then I'll come back and tweak the fence. Okay, it's taken 5 tries, and I've cut back to here to get to it. But in my case, I have a 0.757 groove. So I need my strips to absolutely match that, or we'll have fit issues up the gazoo. So we're there, so now I can go ahead and finish cutting my strips. And this section here, I'll keep track of it, but I'd probably still be able to use it if I need to. Okay, so just doing some test fitting of my strip into my groove, and the answer is, fits nice. Plenty of room for some glue, and so we're off to the races. Let's get going. Okay, so we've cut a second strip, and we just did our test fit, so you can get an idea how that relationship works. And looks good. It goes together without a lot of effort, which is good, because when you have a multiple piece assembly like this, if it was too tight, you'd be beating on stuff, and that ain't gonna get it in this case. So again, the trick is now that we've got our fits right, we'll cut our strips, and then I can sort out the lengths and widths of these strips to make a couple of great assemblies. Okay, so now we've cut our strips, and this is why I just do all of it at once, because now we can start sorting out the combination. And if this is the center line of the boat, and there we go. Probably, and this is why things have got to be dead nuts. Okay. So as an example, we'll go here. There. Yeah, let's get together. This piece is not part of the package, but so this arrangement leaves a fairly large opening. We're getting 3/4 of an inch opening, maybe a little larger than. Okay, so we have the first small grate ready to go for the cabin sole. This one will go just in front of the engine housing, and these ends I'll trim off after I glue this up. Same for these over here. These will go through the rip, so that I can make sure this thing is absolutely parallel, because as I glue this thing up, it could, at least conceivably, it could rack a little bit. So we'll make those adjustments after it's been glued up. So now we'll start on the main grate that goes up over the bilge, and this one is coming out at 13 inches by 5 1/4. Ouch. I think we'll shoot for, there's really not much reason to be more than about 20 inches long, so I'll just kind of work through the remaining material and see how far I can get. I don't want to have to cut any more of this, so I might do some calculating on that. But anyway, we're well on our way. Okay, so we've got our assembly together. Next will be glue up. The larger piece is going to come in at about 17 1/2, and our width is 5 1/4. The small piece in front of the engine, 13. So that should work. That should give me a lot of ventilation down at the bottom of the boat. and these will be able to lift right out of the boat. So this one will be forward on the main bilge, and I'll be able to get access to the bilge pump itself. And fact of the matter is, these holes are large enough that you would actually see some water sloshing around down there if that's what you had. I guess I could have conceivably made the spacing a little smaller, but I think this is going to be fine for my purposes, and when I glue this up, this will be plenty strong enough. Then I'll take it over to the main section and start working out the cutout for both pieces. And then I also have to sort out fore and aft relative to my ribs that I'm putting in the bottom of the boat, and that's a future step. So that's where we are right now. Time to do some gluing here in a minute. Okay, so I've just completed the first glue up step, and I'm using Type Bond 3. And ultimately, once I have these all trimmed to size and whatnot, I'm going to be essentially painting them with epoxy to seal them off. So the Type Bond 3 is waterproof, it's easy to work with, so it will get my initial glue up step done. And then later on, I can take steps to better seal it. So, and that's what we're doing. So those are done for now. I'm on to whatever's next. Okay, here's what I'm doing back here in the stern section of the sole, back where it gets kind of crazy complicated. I've been fitting some oak pieces, and these have varying tapers and whatnot, and I've curve cut them, and before they get installed I will have coated them all in epoxy resin so that they can't absorb any water. But the idea is, this piece is my thickness of my sole, and it comes up, and for the most part comes just under that cut. And this piece of hardboard represents the flat part of the sole, which will come up, and this is where my joint line will be, where I will cut that sole. So this section through here will remain flat, and this is where the transition that, let's see if I can get my hand back here, at this point is where I'll bend the corner up to accommodate the hull. And again, you can see this thickness of my flooring is going to come right up and go underneath the tub here. I still have to cut this section to accommodate the whale hose, and I'm going to put one more rib here that will give me some support right where the right at the bottom of the steps. And I don't know if my boat is perfectly level right now, but I don't think it's too far off. And you can see I don't have a companionway hatch up there right now. It's sitting in the shop waiting for me to glue it up. But the moisture that does get in here from any of a number of sources likes to puddle up right here, right across, right between the cooler and the galley sink, and does not make it to the main bilge. Now maybe if the boat was sitting in the water it would be slightly different, but the whole idea of my new build on this sole is I'm going to put my small grate right in here, and that will help give me some ventilation so that moisture that does want to collect there can evaporate out and or drain to the front. And all that water should ultimately be able to move to the main bilge. So this is all loose right now because as soon as I have it all sorted out, I'll take all these ribs inside and start coating them with epoxy, and we'll have some fun from there. One thing that that I've noted, I took the through hull out over here on the for the sink, and I'm thinking about this idea of putting the electric bilge line to a Y up here that drains down into that. That makes a lot of sense. It shortens up the distance of the bilge hose, and that means it can move quite a bit faster. I think I'll have to think about the issue of if that causes a problem for, it shouldn't, breaking the vacuum or for the bilge hose. There should be enough line or enough water that would run back to it that wouldn't be an issue. But one of the things that has caught my attention, and I don't know if you can see it, back there in that dark spot, right along in there is where they, again, maybe it's the light, you can see where the bottom shelf under the bottom galley was. Out on that outside edge, there's screw holes right into the hull there, and you can see that those dark spots, water either coming off the sink or God knows from where, was building up right on top of those screw heads. So that's just one of the many extra places that we're letting water get in. In fact, I think for sure you can see those right at the bottom of the propane hose. There's screw holes into the hull right there that held the pump. Well, that little platform holds the pump, and again, screwed right into the hull. I am not going to be doing that. I'll be plugging those holes and making sure. Again, you can see them. It's crazy. I'm still stunned by it every time I look at it. Drilling holes without sealer into the hull from the inside. It's, you know, the assumption that the inside of the hull is watertight is a huge mistake. Okay, so today we got another puzzle piece, a couple puzzle pieces going. We got the grates for the sole made.